recording. All right, it's recording. So, you want to start just by like going around and saying your general thoughts on the first couple chapters of the book?
Yeah, sure. Well, from the portion that we read, there was a lot of interesting points and intriguing moments that honestly left you just wanting to know more. Um, some of the questions I constructed a couple questions from these chapters, and one of them that really stood out to me was when they find the stranger, and my question says, Walton discovers a stranger on his journey to the North Pole and learns of his past. What does the stranger's story of attempting to discover the same or similar ambitions or goals reveal to you about Warren's current voyage? So essentially, like, how does the stranger's experience foreshadow what might happen to Walton in his current voyage? So what do you guys think?
I think because the stranger, or Victor as we know now, he constantly expressed
You're muted.
so actually what I think is Victor, as we know now, who was the stranger before, he essentially expresses to Walton how he goes to this extreme, right? This very erratic. He does this a lot of erratic behavior, and this was rooted from the same passion and desire that he now sees in Walton. And he's essentially trying to deter him, or try to turn him away from this type of overexertive passion, because he knows it could possibly lead to a very bad downfall or something that he may later regret. So I essentially think that he just, I guess he's a foreshadow of a future that Walton could potentially have if he decides to go to the extreme.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. So I'm pulling up the text. I'm trying to get to that. Was that chapter 2, I think?
Yeah, I think that was chapter 2.
There that I really liked. Let's see. Wait, no, that would be the letters. Yeah, but I agree. I think the stranger was warning Walton, because clearly the stranger went through something similar to what Walton did, where he pursued glory and he set his sights on one goal, and he cast everything into the side for that one goal, and he's trying to warn Walton against doing that.
Right.
So like here's a quote in letter 4 towards the bottom. It says, this is the stranger talking to Captain Walton. He said, "I do not know that the relation of my disasters will be useful to you yet. When I reflect that you are pursuing the same course, exposing yourself to the same dangers which have rendered me what I am, I imagine that you may deduce an apt moral from my tale, one that may direct you to succeed in your undertaking and console you in case of failure."
Yeah, so I think that essentially sums it up.
Yeah.
And also, y'all are echoing a little bit.
Yeah.
So maybe like.
So I think what we'll do is when you're speaking, I'll mute myself, and I'm speaking out. You mute. Okay. Yeah. So we also learned that later on that after Victor has now been introduced, the stranger has now been introduced as Victor, and he's on the boat discussing with Walton. He tells him his life story, which I thought was really strange, because, I mean, I was thinking, he's on a voyage to the North Pole, and you're telling him about where you were born, your whole family, like what they did and how they met. It's like, what is the essence of the importance of this whole thing? But I think that the way he told this story was essential. So I said, my question was constructed. I said, the name of the stranger Walton found is now revealed to be Victor. Victor begins telling Walton of his past. What mannerisms do you notice in Victor that one also sees in his father, mother, and sister?
Yeah. Well, you talked about, he told about his past, which I thought was very interesting. I know Puritan had a question about, like, why do you think he is telling Walton about his family?
Yeah.
And I thought that that was interesting. And I think that the reason Victor is telling him about his family is because it shows that Victor came from a good background.
Yeah.
Victor came from, I don't know necessarily if it was wealth, but that his family was respected and revered in their community.
Yeah.
And I think that will emphasize to Walton how hard Victor's fall from grace was.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it wasn't that he was set up to fail from the beginning. He
Yeah.
gave it all up, and he lost everything he was potentially going to have by chasing this dream of glory.
Exactly. And I agree with you completely, Brody, because I remember throughout the text, it essentially explained how before Victor was actually born, when his mother lost her dad out of illness, she, was in a very depressed state, and as a result, she was in an orphanage, and she also became a beggar. But fortunately, a man came into her life who pretty much protected her. And did you mute yourself? Because it's kind of echoing.
I'm muted.
Okay, hold up.
Just turn your volume down, because like the volume is coming out of both of y'all's computers, and so when the volume comes out of David's computer, your computer's picking it up, Daniel, and then replaying it. So that's where
All right. Is it echoing?
No.
All right, cool. So as I was saying, so this random man just comes into her life and decides to, to protect her, to care for her, so to essentially alleviate the whole, grief that she just is essentially experiencing. And by doing that, that man essentially becomes her husband, right? And then later on, we figure out that then Victor is born after they decide to travel in different places and different locations. And then we fast forward. Now this mother wants to get a daughter, right? The daughter is named Elizabeth. They found her in an orphanage, and instantly she was very drawn by her because she was very different, obviously in appearance, and also in whole posture in comparison to all the other people. And once she decided to adopt this girl named Elizabeth, Victor responded and essentially said the same thing that was very similar to what his father said. He said that this sister who I now have is mine to protect, to cherish, to take care of. And this caring nature is something obviously that he must have seen and perceived from his father. As the way his father treated his mother, he reciprocated the same. He wanted to reciprocate that same behavior, the same mannerisms to his sister. So like, as you said, he learned very good qualities and belief. Because I remember there's a quote he said that during his infance, he learned the lessons of patience, and other things like that. So like you said, essentially by showing how he had a very good life and a good childhood, when he actually fell into this like very corrupt state, it shows, like you said, how he fell deeply from grace.
Another thing I think I noticed when I was reading and constructing this question was like the mannerisms is like a loaded word when regarding to Victor, because when you think about how the way he acted even as a child, you notice the same resemblance in his father. You see, like Daniel said later when he was quoting how when his mother was holding her dead father in his hands and he came and swooped in, Victor described his father as an angel, as one who was like coming to comfort her, and he almost like a sword to protect her. And we see this same attitude and mindset in Victor when he gets a new sister as Elizabeth. He starts quoting and saying how like she's mine and I will love her and protect her even until death. So you see that resilience, and not only that, but that zeal that like when he's driven, like he's like all the way. Yeah. And like nothing is gonna stop him or separate him from these things. So I think that represents another, again, like you could see that in his father and his mother, because one, his mother was a very hardworking woman. So definitely he was also hardworking, because his mother, after her father had gone ill, started working very, very hard to keep him alive. Yeah. He eventually died, but that we see this same resemblance and the same character in Victor. Yeah. And Victor
I have a question about Walton.
Yeah.
Here, I wrote it down. I think it relates to this. I said, Walton's desire for a friend shows his loneliness and longing for some form of happiness. Walton does not know what will bring him happiness, but he is experimenting to try and figure it out. And we can see that in that
Yeah.
quote. He says, like, there's something at work in my soul that I don't understand, you know? And so
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask y'all, do you think this voyage, if he completed this voyage, do you think it would bring him true happiness? If not, do you think he would continue to try?
I honestly don't think he would find happiness, and I think that is why it was important that Victor kind of popped up in the story, because this constant need to fill this void in him led to his ultimate demise. Like, he ended up destroying himself. Victor ended up destroying himself because he was so curious. And we later know this because Miss Kirchen later creates a question and says, what was the author of the book of Frankenstein basically saying in our overarching message when Victor realizes, like, oh, after he had just brought Frankenstein to life,
That's later.
he's just like, yeah, and he's just like, what have I done, basically? And he just realizes that all this was pretty much in vain because he had exerted so much energy and time into one objective that he neglected all his other priorities, like his family. So
And you know, I think that's a general thing in life. And I think
yeah,
we'll discuss that in the next discussion more.
yeah,
You know, but
So,
yeah,
Dave, you mute yourself.
yeah.
So what I was going to say essentially is essentially what David said, that I guess you can say there's somewhat of a misconception, and I don't believe that Walton will find fulfillment in just getting a friend, because we can imply that he's not, because before this, Walton had this kind of vague, abstract idea of what he wanted to do. He knew he wanted to get to the North Pole.
right.
He had some idea of how he's going to get there and things like that, but he obviously didn't know in detail of what was going to happen. And
Yeah.
obviously, in the process of the voyage, he gets has this epiphany and realizes that he's still missing something. And this feeling of fulfillment, he realized he could probably seek through different avenues. And as a result, that's just it'll probably lead to him going through other vain things.
Right.
If it's not wealth, it's friends. If it's not friends, it's goals. If it's not goals, it's just conquering more terrain or exploring more terrain and things like that. So it just becomes pretty much a vain attempt to fulfill a void that he can never really fill.
Right. I'm trying to find this quote. It was a really good quote. Let's see. But yeah, it seems as though Walton just he's trying to fulfill himself, but he has no idea how to do it.
Exactly.
And so he tried to, become a poet, and he wanted to be like Aristotle, and he wanted to be revered for his poetry ability, but he failed. Right. And so then he moves on to this next thing, which is going to the North Pole, and I think he spent like the last 6 years working on that.
Exactly.
And that's so. I think when you put all of your effort and all of your energy into this one thing and you fail, then, I mean, even if you don't fail, if you put all your effort and all your energy into this one thing and it's not perfect, like it's not exactly the way you imagine, you're going to be disappointed and it's going to destroy you,
Exactly.
So I don't think that it's possible for him to find true happiness from this,
And I actually wanted to mention another question that I had about Walton's voyage. So my question is, in Walton's voyage, he and his crew discovered an impaired traveler on the ice, which we know as Victor. In the recuperative process, Walton begins to share his life story and aspirations to Victor before Victor does the same. Why do you guys think Walton was so comfortable to just essentially just tell his whole story before, the stranger or Victor decided to tell his? Do you think there was a reasoning behind it, or?
Question. I think it's probably just, it goes back to he's lonely and he doesn't really know what he's doing,
Right.
He doesn't know what is going to fulfill him. He doesn't. And so I guess this is the first person that would probably listen to him.
Exactly.
So he just pours everything he has into Victor or into the stranger.
And that's, I think, another problem, because there's some people that just don't know when to stop. And you notice that because he writes about he needed somebody to guide him and tell him okay, this is too much. You've gone too far, but he didn't have that person. So I think even him interacting with Victor and immediately just saying, look, this is my best friend now, and I need to get as close as possible and let him know my life and my everything, my ambitions. You're going too far too quickly, and that's how you sever relationships, because you get too close, and it could actually honestly be detrimental to both of you. So again, that just shows like when you're so eager to do something to the point where like other laws of morality, of consciousness, of reason are just thrown out the window, you can actually be a detriment to yourself.
Right.
And speaking of Victor, later on we learn that he finds a finds a, what was it, like a novel of Cornelius Agrippa, and it's mentioned in chapter 2. And I constructed a question and said, Cornelius Agrippa is mentioned in chapter 2 as a medieval German writer of magic, astrology, and the occult. How does Victor's discovery of this man help to further solidify his preconceived notions of old and new philosophers?
His preconceived notion of old and new philosophers.
Yeah. So basically, like his idea of like modern science and new science is what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
do you want to answer that one?
well, his dad, he was reading Cornelius Agrippa.
Yeah.
Right.
I believe this was when was this? Was this in chapter 2 or?
Yeah, chapter 2.
Chapter 2? Okay, let me pull up chapter 2 just so I can see there. So he was reading Cornelius Agrippa, and his dad just said, this is trash.
Yeah, right.
That's trash. And he didn't explain why. Because, in the paragraph it says, if instead of this remark, my father had taken the pains to explain to me that the principles of Agrippa had been entirely exploded and that a modern system of science had been introduced which possessed much greater powers than the ancient, because the powers of the latter were chimerical. With those of the former were real and practical, under such circumstances I should certainly have thrown Agrippa aside and have contented my imagination, warmed as it was, by returning with greater ardor to my former studies. So essentially what his dad did to him was Victor was interested in, or not Victor, but yeah, Victor. Victor was interested in Agrippa and the old science, but his dad was like, no, you can't do that. That's stupid. The old science.
Right.
And so then
I was going to say that
ignited
Victor didn't really know like the full concept of natural philosophy and the modern science and the ancient science. He didn't really know it in depth as he did then.
Right.
I would say that the point of him finding out by chance that book was what really introduced him to the different avenues and different aspects of natural science.
Right.
And as a result of his father somewhat like neglecting his desire and inquiry of this this book, it caused him to want to even more learn about the secrets, because he says before this, it mentions that Victor said that he was not at all interested in the government, the code of the government. You're not interested in essentially the political and the governmental structures of this world, but rather he was like more fond of and understanding the secrets of heaven and earth.
Right.
So that was the things that really drawn him. And as a result of his father saying, hey, don't worry about it, don't look at this book, it's none of is of no interest, of no benefit to you. Right. It obviously stirred him to want to read it more.
Naturally, if someone, like if you're doing something and someone tells you like that's stupid, don't do that, but they don't offer any explanation,
right?
Especially if you're somewhat of a rebellious person, like it seems Victor is, then you're going to be immediately attracted to learning more about it, so that maybe you can learn why it's stupid.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of proposes a question. What do you think would have happened if his father actually explained to him what this this book is really about, and just essentially explained to him like, hey, this is what it's about, but this book is not really that essential because it's not, though that it is the ancient science is not as relevant as the modern science that is today. Do you think if his father was actually more understanding of Victor's inquiry of this book, do you think he would have decided to go on this path of you think?
Honestly, I feel like there's two sides to this, because like how he mentions like the whole path of destruction that led him, like that he was on. He said it was almost as fate, like destiny, destined, like or had already preordained this. Like he was planned to do this. So like I feel like because Victor, because of the way he is, even if he was explained, he still probably would have researched. And with his curiosity, probably would have continued and led to him doing even more stuff. Because he eventually, as we read, eventually gets into some occultic stuff, because what's his name? The guy that Cornelius Agrippa did magic and did occultic things. So he tried, but he failed, and he thought, "Oh, it's not the philosopher or this person who is teaching me; it's me. I just need to master this."
Yeah, it's interesting. It probably would have saved him from that first
Yeah, from that initial
round of pain, because
yeah,
the first thing that happened was his dad told him you can't read Agrippa, that's stupid, and so then he became obsessed with it, and he became obsessed with Agrippa and all of Agrippa's peers, But then there was that thunderstorm, and
Yes, true. Yeah.
there was the intelligent guy with them. They didn't really go into much detail as to who this guy was, but the lightning destroyed the tree, and the guy explained exactly what happened and how it was contradictory to what these old scientists were saying. And so that was the first incident where Victor was really sort of thrown for a loop. He didn't know what to do anymore because everything he had just studied had been disproven in a matter of seconds. And so that destroyed him, and he put all his studies down. Then it was immediately reignited when he met M. Waldman at Ingolstadt. So I don't know if maybe if he had never done the research in the first place, then M. Waldman would not have had as big of an effect on him, and he may not have pursued those studies as hard as he did. It's possible. I mean, it's speculative, but we can't really know. But it definitely would have saved him from that first round of pain.
For sure. Yeah.
But then it's like you said, David. He even said in let's see. He said in, I believe this is chapter 3. Yep, chapter 3. And he said, I find it. Dang. Well, yeah. So I'm not. Yeah. So he definitely would have been saved from that first round. So here, I'll have a question. Let's see. All right. This is a good one. I like this question. So it seems as though Victor's worldview is entirely dependent on the opinions and thoughts of others. He pours everything he has into the works of Agrippa and his peers and begins to adopt their beliefs. As soon as someone mentions anything contradictory, his whole world was destroyed and he became distasteful to these intellectuals. Do you think this dependence is something that will lead Victor down a dark path in the future? What happens when the people around him die, and what happens when these idols that he looks up to are continuously disproven, because that's just the way it's going to happen?
Right. Yeah. So what I was my approach on this is because we kind of find out later on that Victor gets to that point, that breaking point where he passes, those moral parameters in terms of what he wants to do, in terms of, inquiry and discovery. And as a result of that, it causes him to lose emotion and essentially just become very apathetic. He says that as a result, it almost allowed him to cut himself off from all life and all, relation with other people. So I would say that it not necessarily made him, in the beginning, yes, it made him dependent because he obviously was guided by other people's, scientists' way of thinking. And the result of that, by going to the extreme of that, it caused him to not really depend on others, but kind of push other people away.
Right.
That's how I saw it.
Yeah. It seemed as though when there was no longer anyone else that he could depend on,
right? Yeah.
Because he had surpassed all of them.
Yeah.
He sort of lost all touch with everyone.
Exactly. And I think, and honestly, was because I wasn't sure, because the way, from the beginning, because we learn of in the beginning of chapter 2 of Victor's and Elizabeth's relationship and how strong of a bond they had together, and I was thinking because of this tendency for him to go to the extreme with everything that he does, I was thinking he would probably not sever that bond with his sister or his family. But I think based on his curiosity, I think later on his drive to learn more, to understand knowledge, I think, like you said, might isolate him and possibly disconnect him from his family. But speaking of going back just a few to chapter 2, I had a question that I think was very important. So in the beginning, it talks of Elizabeth and Victor's differences and how they think and their interests, right? And I constructed this question that said, What is the significance in chapter 2 of describing the polarized ambitions of Victor and Elizabeth? And how might these differences allude to what Victor might be pursuing in the future?
Yeah, let me do that. So that's a good question. I think it's another one of those examples, just like when his father sort of told him not to read anything from Agrippa. It's another one of those examples of his sort of rebellious nature. He sort of is divergent where he'll do anything that other people don't really to do. It's weird. He's got a weird sort of thing where he's dependent on others, but he also like doesn't want to do what others want him to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's like dependent on rebelling against other people. It's an
Right.
odd.
It's very complicated. Yeah. And I actually, this also kind of relates to one of my questions where I kind of talk about. So one of my questions is essentially about this kind of like similarity that we kind of see in Walton and in Victor. So I said throughout the accounts of Victor's and Walton's life, what are some defining concepts, tenets, or experiences that they both shared? So things that essentially, like you could say, that they both essentially, this is something that represented both of them.
So they both grew up. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they both grew up with good families.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's important that Victor emphasized the fact that he also grew up with a good family, because it shows Walton that if this can happen to me, this can happen to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they sort of had that same past. And I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to pull up the text so I can have more evidence. But
I also want to mention too, another thing that I kind of noticed that kind of like came back to me. If you guys remember from the beginning, when Walton was talking about how he just really desired, to explore the northern pole, right? He essentially says how he, like, after looking through his uncle's Thomas's library and reading all the accounts and all the volumes of the different explorations, it says later on after that his father or someone, I think, forgot who it was, but an incident happened in when his father just had to go on an exploration, and as a result of that, either was a grandparent restricted him from ever seeing or even going to explore outside of wherever he was confined. And as a result, that made him even more eager, which is something we see that resembled in Victor. Being restrained and restricted for seeing something you're so passionate and want to learn about will then evidently cause someone to do whatever it takes to learn about it, at whatever cost.
Yeah.
I just found a good quote that says, it's in letter 1, and this says, this is Walton. He says, "My education was neglected, yet I was passionately fond of reading. These volumes were my study day and night, and my familiarity with them increased that regret which I had felt as a child on learning that my father's dying injunction had forbidden my uncle to allow me to embark on a seafaring life."
Right.
So that is incredibly parallel to the story of Victor. I don't know necessarily if Victor's education was neglected, but Victor's education was definitely not, I don't think, prioritized, or his dad was not interested in educating Victor, at least like on a personal level.
Yeah.
So again, his father sort of like forbade him from doing any of these readings and made Victor more obsessed with it. And the same exact thing is parallel with Walton. So I think in a lot of ways they reflect each other.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you guys think that that these people like Victor's father and as well as Walton's uncle, from stopping him to go on trips and voyages, right? Yeah. Do you guys think, in essence, they represent like a limit to it's like a limit and an idea of not exceeding over like this idea and passion to the point where it overconsumes you and then leads to something bad? Do you believe like they represent that hey, you should probably stop at the stopping point before?
I think the whole, based on the portion we have read, the author of this book is using a lot of metaphorical and like illustrative themes and like phrases to create an overarching message that there is a point at which where you should stop. Like, you should be curious. Curiosity is a good thing because it does add motivation to want to learn and discover things. But there is at a point where, like, as a human being, you should not exceed morally and socially. So um, I think that message is preached throughout the entire thing, and I and I and I and I and we can see that like I said with the polarization of Victor and his sister. His sister loved nature and things out there, but she wasn't like driven to understand the cause of like what
Wasn't like
founded these
that.
things. Yeah, like what created all these things. Like that was the problem with Victor. Like he wanted to know these things, but it drove him to a point where like you should not exceed. And it's not like you shouldn't understand the cause and effect of things, but it led him, I think, or will lead him to a pretty dark path later on.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not, that's a good question, Daniel. I'm not really sure what, Victor's dad and Walton's dad, I'm not really sure what they represent. It's an interesting, I mean, they could represent the limit, and that would make sense because, they're older, they're experienced, because at the moment when these events happened to Victor and Walton, they were children, and they had experience of when the line was and what the limit was. And so they could be sort of the same as Victor is to Walton. These parents were warning them in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
You shouldn't do this because it's going to lead you down a dark path. And neither of them listened.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes Victor and Walton unique is that they didn't listen. A lot of people would just say, oh, okay, Agrippa's terrible, I'm not going to read Agrippa. But both Victor and Walton in that scenario would have continued, and that's what makes them pretty, like, that's what led them both down their dark path. They eventually, or I guess Walton, we don't really know, but it can be assumed based on what we've seen.
And I think it's important, like what you said, about how like Victor started off with a very good life. Like he mentioned of how his parents treated him so well,
right?
And how he learned like so much. So like he's almost he basically explaining how like he had no excuse,
right,
to go down this path. Like he had no reason. It's not like his parents neglected him or treated him bad, and out of rebellion he decided to go on this path. No, he willingly, out of curiosity, plunged himself into this dark path that led him, well, I think will lead him to his ultimate demise. Honestly, I think so.
I think that was a really good decision by Mary Shelley when she was writing this book. It's a very unique thing in this book, because the general path that the protagonist takes is that they came from some dark background, and that leads them down a dark path in which they then have to recover from. But the ultimate source of the problem was the original sin was like the parents, But she took it the other way, where all the responsibility fell on Victor, because he had everything lined up, all his ducks in a row to where he could have been very successful, but he lost all of it through ambition and greed. So I think that further emphasized the point that she was trying to make. I think that was a really smart decision, and it's uncommon. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and that also brings up my question about Victor, because I said my question says, Victor had mentioned how he used to discover the secrets of heaven and earth. So where do you think this inquiry at its root stemmed from? Like, where do you think it really started? I know we pointed out how, when he started, when he discovered the book of Agrippa, the principles of Agrippa and things like that, that kind of essentially kind of sparked it a little bit. But where do you think it really started? Because he even mentions before this that even before he even was exposed to this, he already, was very interested in the things of this, in this type of concept and the things of natural philosophy. So where do you think it really started from?
Well, I think because we're discussing the British medieval era, or not the British, but we're discussing British literature, we can understand that during that period of time, people and society were influenced by like religious commentators and religious people. Like these things were a part of their lives. So for new and upcoming philosophers and people who were going through the Enlightenment period, like just questioning everything, I think it also intrigued him because he greatly looked upon the old philosophers of the times, like, and how they discovered things. And he really didn't care for anything the new philosophers were going to do, because what they had done already was already so groundbreaking that it almost like altered that reality that was already set by either the church or their society, or rules that they had just naturally just governed by. So I think socially, it was a norm at the time to question these things. but I think because Victor was the way he was, he took it in a way that I think most philosophers probably would have never done.
Right.
Instead of allowing his curiosity to help him build upon what has already been uh, uh, founded or what has already been discovered, he just tried to create something new out of nowhere, or just try to create a whole new avenue of life. Um, we see later on, but
Yes.
yeah,
I that's a good question, Daniel. It's because where did it start? That's like the ultimate question is
yeah,
did it start, was it nature versus nurture? Did he
Right.
have some genetic thing where he was just naturally curious and naturally rebellious and naturally wanted to just do what the opposite of everybody else was doing and sort of go his own way, but at the same time he needed the approval of the other people? Was that
yeah,
natural, or is this nurture? And I think in letter or chapter 2, Victor's describing it, and I found this good text. It says, "My temper was sometimes violent and my passions vehement, but by some law in my temperature they were turned not towards childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn, and not to learn all things indiscriminately. I confess that neither the structure of languages, nor the code of governments, nor the politics of various states possessed attractions for me. It was the secrets of heaven and earth that I desired to learn. And whether it was the outward substance of things, or the inner spirit of nature and the mysterious soul of man that occupied me, still my inquiries were directed to the metaphysical, or in its high sense, the physical secrets of the world." And so he recognizes it from an early age.
yeah,
He was this curious person about the things that were metaphysical and the things that he could not see. And so that's, I don't know if that question can truly be answered, because it may have
yeah.
just been
Because we
genetic,
just don't
and it
have
may have just been he was born
context.
that way.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe once we read further, we'll be able to answer that.
But you mentioned something that I think was also pretty important. You mentioned how he basically essentially had anger issues, and that that kind of dictated the kind of friends he had at school. Um, how do you think his emotions, like speaking, not even speaking of anger, but just his emotions in general, influenced him? Was he more of a rational thinker, or did he allow himself, do you think, to be swayed more by his emotions to achieve a goal, or rather than the real objective of like the purpose behind achieving this goal? What do you guys think?
I definitely think that he was swayed by his emotions.
Yeah.
I think his emotions guided him way more than anything logical, because
Yeah.
you can see his father told him not to read Agrippa. I think from the beginning he was driven to read those things and to research.
Mhm.
And so he started to research Agrippa just naturally, and his father told him, "Hey, don't do that." And so then he
Yeah.
got emotionally attached to that because of
Yeah.
that interaction,
Mm.
And so he was like, "Well, I have to do it now because I got to learn what the problem is." Basically, that was
Right.
Yeah.
subconsciously what he was dealing with. And then later, when he was he developed some, it was an odd sort of like personal bond with these
Yeah.
philosophers.
Mm.
He began to become like attached to them
Yeah.
emotionally,
Yeah.
not just learning from them. Because you
Mm.
can see that when the intellectual tells him that the lightning hits the tree, and the intellectual says, "Hey, this isn't, or this is what happened, and it's contradictory to what everything he had heard." It sort of was like someone that he was close to had just died,
Yeah.
because everything he had just learned had been disproven. And it's an odd relationship that he had with these people. And then he becomes emotionally attached again when Waldman talks to him. But yeah, so I think definitely he was guided by his emotions.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, Brody. I do believe, yeah, he was definitely guided by his emotions. And it's kind of ironic because, by, being exposed to all these logical philosophers who, who were deemed as rational thinkers, people who were esteemed for their discoveries and their inquiries and all the things they did, he took it to a different light. And instead of really understanding how rational and, they were thinking and the things of principle, he got so, encompassed in the fact that his idea and his beliefs were constantly clashing with that of others. So that led him to be driven so much by passion and rather by logic, which obviously, we see leads to his downfall. Indeed.
Right. I'm pulling up chapter. I can't remember which chapter it's in. That was a fantastic quote that I've been trying to find, but I cannot find it. But essentially it's about Walton stated that his main drive from the beginning was glory. He said, "I have no interest in wealth. None of that really matters. What I really want is glory." And do you here? one of y'all needs to unmute. Yeah. But so do you think that pursuit is something that's noble? Do you think that pursuing glory is a good pursuit, something that people should do? And if not, then what do you think is a noble pursuit that would bring some
So to me, I think honestly, for
philosophical?
Walton and for Victor, I would say that they kind of max their idea to gain glory under their own emotions, because I feel like they were driven by pride.
Right.
They personally just wanted to make themselves known and not actually really contribute to the world. They wanted to discover something that would, make them stand out and make them be in the books. So everybody knows them as this person who did this, instead of discovering something that could actually help contribute to the understanding of how this world works. And now we see that same ambition in Victor and Walton, and they mask that kind of that real emotion as a form of interest or curiosity to just discover things. But in all reality, they really just want to make themselves known. And I think that was the problem, because their motives were not pure, especially for Walton. And I think that's why when Victor comes on board, it's very trivial and vital that he listens to Victor, because Victor understands exactly what he's doing and where exactly he's headed to. So it's important that he stray from that path so he doesn't lead himself into destruction as well.
And I was actually going to say, with the idea of glory, right, and the concept of like a person trying to attain glory, it almost seems in the sense of kind of that you're trying to portray a very arrogant character, right?
Selfish.
And it's almost kind of funny too, because we kind of see that kind of displayed through Victor by almost this idea of attaining glory, of wanting people to see what he's accomplished. He's almost played God by reanimating something lifeless and adding making something that had lifeless matter, somehow bringing life to it, and on even calling it its creator, wanting it to admire him as and things like that. But yeah,
That's later. That's later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it's, and I had the thought, I wonder if, because Victor, he talks about how everybody loved his sister and like everybody respected his father, and everyone in his family was deeply respected in the world, and I wonder if he sort of felt like left out almost. I don't know if left out's the right word, but he felt like he needed to prove himself, and so he needed to prove himself through glory. And I think Walton probably went through the same thing, because they both seem to be missing something and they don't really know what they're missing, and so they both think that being respected would achieve it. But clearly, and that goes back to the question you asked of what does his father represent? Because so clearly his father is respected. Victor's father is respected, and Victor's father has attained that glory. And even Victor's father is saying, "Hey, you need to stop," And so I think that's something interesting,
I agree.
So let's see if I think I'm all out of questions. Y'all have any more?
Let's see.
I wanted to ask you guys, because I thought this was very kind of strange. Because when you guys remember when Victor's mom goes, eventually already had Victor, right? He's born, and after a while, Victor's mom, Caroline, is now like, okay, I want a daughter, and she goes out to an orphanage and sees this child. But then in the description, like, she's describing how peculiar this child is and how fair her skin is. Like, what do you guys think was like the significance of Victor in his story describing the complexion of this baby, of this child, and how do you think her entering his family contributed to his overall emotions and mindset?
Yeah, I think he really loved her, and he wanted to take care of her,
Yeah.
And I think that led him down the path that he eventually went on later in the book, because he felt the need to take care of something, you know. But
Yeah.
I think that her describing Elizabeth's like complexion and stuff, I think it could go back to showing like Elizabeth seemed to be very special,
Mm.
just immediately special, you know, and
Yeah.
so was their father and mother and all that, you know.
Yeah.
And so that may have driven Victor down the path that he eventually went on because he felt like he needed to prove himself.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think it also like it's weird because it's almost like in the story he identifies their identity. Like the father is this reverence man, the mom is this hard worker who has 2 kids,
Right.
and now Elizabeth is the one just revered by everybody, who's so loved, who
Right.
just brings like happiness to the family, and he's just Victor. I mean, his parents bring him love, but he hasn't really contributed to the family in any way within his story.
Right.
So I feel like his story is almost showing or essentially explaining how he felt. Like he felt almost entitled to go and discover these things because he himself didn't understand his identity.
Right.
And I think him and just exemplifying on all of their identities basically showed us how he was driven, like basically showed it his motive of why he was so driven to do these things and why he wanted to gain so much glory, just like Walton. So yeah.
Yeah, and I would say like it also relates to what Walton said, you know, how he wanted, you know, to search for this great purpose, this something that, you know, would fill this void, this emptiness inside of him, right? And to go back to what your question about the description of Elizabeth, I think in my perspective that when Caroline first saw her, I'm looking at Elizabeth, and obviously when Victor described her, I think in essence she was somewhat of a resemblance of her when she saw her, like of the past, you know, the past, not necessarily the torment, but you know, some of the traumatic experiences that she went through, and she could almost sense it in Elizabeth,
Right.
which I guess driven her more to actually, you know, include her into the family.
Yeah.
And like essentially, like you said, David, by Victor seeing all these things, the father being very protective and be revered and you know had all these attributes. The mother had all these attributes and things that characterize her in the story in the and as well as Elizabeth. You know, naturally Victor would probably feel kind of left out,
Right.
and you know he needs something to define him, something that says, oh, this is Victor. He is known. You know, as Walton said, you know, he wanted to be known in those in the books, so he started to do some literature and things like that, and started writing, and that didn't work out. So, you know, I think inevitably it's like the search for one's purpose in life, you know, that they're both trying to figure out.
I think another thing that I didn't really think about while I was reading it, but I've sort of thought about while we've been talking, is you know, they had Victor's mom and dad. They had Victor, but apparently like that wasn't enough because Victor's mom really wanted a daughter, you know, and so that both of y'all are muted, but yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So that may have also subconsciously hurt Victor because, you know, why do y'all want a daughter so bad? Like y'all have like, am I not enough? You know?
Yeah.
And so he didn't really talk about it. And of course he talks about how much he loves Elizabeth and how much he loves his family, but subconsciously and in like that may have affected him and led him to be so interested and curious and desire glory so much because he felt like he needed to be enough and he wasn't enough for his family. So he needed to prove it in some other way.
Right. Yeah.
I agree.
No, well, I think that's a good stopping point. We're almost at 50 minutes here, so
all right.
Y'all good?
Yeah.
That was good. That was a good discussion.
Yeah, it was.
All right, then I have to end this meeting to stop the recording. So I'll just end the meeting and then I'll just call you on the phone.
All right, sounds good.
All right.